To our continued coverage now of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, U.S. President Joe Biden, following his meeting with Polish President Andrzej Duda, joined NATO's eastern flank to show support for their security after Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Tuesday Moscow has suspended a landmark nuclear arms control treaty over strong Western support for Ukraine. Putin's announcement came during his State of the Nation speech to Russian lawmakers on Tuesday. The U.S. president said Putin's decision was a big mistake. After discussions with NATO leaders, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and the Polish president shared thoughts on the next dimensions of the war. Meanwhile, EU ambassadors are discussing today a 10th package of sanctions on Russia. On Tuesday, they said a deal could be reached if the 27 member states manage to overcome differences about a ban on synthetic Russian rubber and diamond imports. Among those the bloc is seeking to target are Russians it says are involved in the illegal deportation of some 6,000 Ukrainian children. A package worth 11 billion euros is also likely to include, for the first time, a ban on all exports to 7 Iranian entities believed to be making items used by Russia in the war. Speaking to journalists after a meeting with diplomats in the morning, Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko said she would like to see the financial sector, the diamonds and the nuclear industry targeted in future sanction packages, although she was waiting to see what would be in the 10th package.
Circumvention of sanction. That is something that we are looking at. Financial sectors, diamonds, nuclear industry and propagandists and also organizations and companies that were facilitating of deporting Ukrainian children in Russia. So it's very important for us. So that's why we hope that we will see this sanction in 10th package. Otherwise, maybe in the next packages, but we will we're going to have a very practical discussion here during this 2 days, and we'll see what is going to be at the final version of the sanction package. So on everything that gives revenue to Russian economy and everything that gives power for Russia to keep fighting. So that's why we always say that need to strengthen sanction policy, but because the war is still lasting. So we know that it should be as strong as possible, and we should fight on military field, and we should fight on sanction field, and it should be tight until the war will be finished.
A Chinese top diplomat, Wang Yi, has met Russia's security chief in Moscow. Both sides agree that peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific region should be resolutely upheld and opposing the introduction of a Cold War mentality. Mr. Wang met with leaders of China-Russia Strategic Security Consultation Mechanism and Nikolai Patrushev, Secretary of Russia's Security Council, both sides discussing ways to improve global governance, according to a statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. The two sides exchanged views on the Ukrainian situation, and the statement said without elaborating, it added the two sides expressed their willingness to jointly practice true multilateralism, oppose all forms of unilateral bullying, and promote the democratization of international relations and the multipolarization of the world. Wang was due to meet Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He did later today. We'll talk about it later. As part of his visit to Moscow, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said he does not rule out a meeting between Wang and President Vladimir Putin, whom he also met later today. And more on that now. Mr. Wang did meet with President Vladimir Putin of Russia for the talks today. He told him relations between Beijing and Moscow plays an important role in stabilizing the international situation. Putin said the two countries were reaching new milestones in cooperation and development in remarks broadcast on Russian TV. He also told Mr. Wang he was looking forward to a visit to Moscow by Chinese President Xi Jinping and to deepen the partnership between the two countries. China's top diplomat said relations between the two nations could not be influenced by other countries. During his visit, as we mentioned, he had talks with Prime Minister Sergei Lavrov and Russian Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev. Joining me now is political and international affairs analyst, Professor Femi Otobanjo. Professor, thank you so much for joining me on the program today. Professor, thank you for joining me on the program today. Professor, I think your microphone is muted. If you would like to unmute that so that we can have the conversation. We seem to be having technical difficulties with Professor Otubanjo. Let's move on now to President Vladimir Putin hailing Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine during a rally in Moscow earlier today. He called on the crowds to chant Russia to show their support for those he said were defending the fatherland. Tens of thousands of people packed into Moscow's Luzhniki Stadium, which has a capacity of 81,000. They were waving white, blue, and red Russian flags and listening to patriotic songs before President Putin's arrival. President Putin told the crowd, right now there is a battle on our historical frontiers for our people. They're being led by the same kind of courageous fighters as those that are standing here now. Next to us, they're fighting heroically, courageously, bravely. We're so proud of them, according to the president, who also added, glory to the defenders of the fatherland, holding on the eve of Russia's February 23rd holiday, celebrating those who serve in the armed forces. He told them also today they're supported by the whole country. President Putin said he'd just been updated by military chiefs on the situation at the front. The Kremlin cast the war as a special military operation to protect Russia's own security in what it sees as an existential confrontation with the West.
Прямо сейчас идет бой на наших исторических рубежах за наших людей. Его ведут такие же мужественные бойцы, которые...
Oh, you could hear the supporters there as President Vladimir Putin attended the large rally in Moscow. Tens of thousands of people were there in the Luzhniki Stadium. They said they believe Russia is on the right course over conflict in Ukraine, referring to the president as a father figure. Tens of thousands of people did pack the stadium. It has a capacity of 81,000. They waved white, blue, and red Russian flags and listened to patriotic songs before Putin's arrival. One of the attendees, Maria Yakovleva, who was arriving for the concert, said she wanted to hear Putin's address at the concert because he provided peace of mind for the people. According to her, you listen to him and you believe that all will be well, everything will be wonderful, that we are on the right path. She says it's like a father for us, at least for her. That's how she feels. Another attendee who did not wish to give his name said he was convinced Russia was on the right path and only victory and reunification lay ahead for the country. President Putin hailed Russian soldiers at the event, especially those fighting in Ukraine, saying they are defending the fatherland. The concert was held on the eve of Russia's February 23rd holiday, celebrating those who serve in the armed forces.
Мы гордимся ими, гордимся, и в их честь трижды ура! 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 Они должны услышать наше приветствие. Сегодня их поддерживают.
Президент Российской Федерации Владимир Владимирович Путин.
Прямо сейчас идет бой на наших исторических рубежах за наших людей. Его ведут такие же мужественные бойцы, которые здесь стоят сейчас, рядом с нами.
An excited crowd hailing the Russian president. But other countries have been trying to make sense of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. A lingering Russia-Ukraine conflict will serve the interests of the United States in multiple ways. According to Cuban political analyst speaking to the media earlier on, according to him, the US-led Western world has been supplying Ukraine with weapons to fight against Russia, which is prolonging the warfare that should have ended soon. That's Rocky Swestegui, who is with the Cuba Center for Research of International Policy. He says one of America's main interests is to weaken Russia as much as possible by prolonging the conflict. He says this conflict could have ended now, but it continues. It's just because the US and its allies have supplied a raft of modern weapons to Ukraine. Rocky once said the US wants Russia's capabilities weakened by trying to exhaust its military and financial resources while imposing tough sanctions in the name of the conflict. Meanwhile, the West is reaping huge benefits in modernizing their weapons through arms sales to Ukraine, according to Rocky. He says besides all arms sales, Ukraine can profit even more than normal. It can also weed out outdated weapons and upgrade their arsenals. By doing so, all NATO countries upgrade their military equipment through weapons supplies to Ukraine to have more modern weapons and ammunitions. Russia's ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, says the explosion on the Nord Stream gas pipelines in September were an act of international terrorism. He was speaking at a Security Council meeting on Tuesday. Investigations by Denmark, Germany and Sweden have not yet concluded, according to the countries, but the UN Security Council met to discuss the September incident. Denmark, Germany and Sweden told the Security Council in a joint letter that the Russian authorities have been informed regarding the ongoing investigations by their national authorities, which had so far established that the damage to the pipelines was caused by powerful explosions due to sabotage. They said the consequences from the leaks in terms of greenhouse gas emissions were substantial and worrisome. And Moscow has maintained, without providing evidence, the West was behind the blasts affected the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure. So what's been happening today? A Chinese top government official in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Wang Yi, has been in Russia. He's met with President Vladimir Putin. He's also met with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, as well as other top officials of the government. He says relations between Russia and China are stronger than ever and will not be influenced by other countries. What else has happened today? US President Joe Biden is in Poland, where leaders from NATO are meeting regarding the situation in Ukraine and the new dimensions of the war. Well, China has not condemned Russia for its invasion of Ukraine, but says that its relations with Russia will not be influenced by those countries. What does that mean? I have Professor Femi Otobanjo. Luckily, we have been able to reconnect with him. He is a political and international affairs analyst. Professor, thank you for making time to be on the program today. And I wanted to comment on Mr. Wang's statement. First of all, the visit, the timing of it, coming the week of the first anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as well as what he said in Russia. Doesn't that sound like an open declaration of support for Russia amidst this invasion going on?
Yes, of course. Everybody looks up to the first anniversary. The war has gone on for a year, and it's almost a time to reassure people, Putin to reassure his own people, Biden to continue to encourage support for Ukraine, Putin to continue to mobilize his own people to continue to support the war. So it's a time for speeches. It's a time for mobilization. It's a time for getting people on board again, not to be weary. Of course, Putin has tried to tell his people that the West is to blame for the war, which means that if the war is going to end, it is the West that will make the move for it to end. It seems that the West has been contemptuous of Russia, has disregarded Russia, has attempted to destroy the Russian economy, trying to bring down Russia, and has bolstered Ukraine's ability to prosecute the war. Without the West, of course, Putin, according to the Putin statement, the war should have ended a long time ago. It's also announced that he's not going to be seen to be compromising with the West by withdrawing from the strategic arms reduction talks, the new strategic arms reduction talk start. It's a declaration of a new aggressive mode coming just before what is expected to be a spring offensive in Ukraine. So it's going to involve a lot of expenditure of life and property and ammunition and so on. So you need to prepare the minds of your people. What are you actually fighting for? And it's stated clearly. And it seems that it might have reached the minds of his people.
Yeah, but I also wanted you to talk some more about, China's position in this. The U.S. has been accusing China of supporting Russia, openly supporting Russia, because it's never condemned Russia. And there were rumors that China was also providing weapons to Russia, though they have denied it. They've always said the U.S. has speculations about, Russia-China relations. But is there some truth there?
Yes, well, it's interesting that China and Russia are members of BRICS, the alternative power bloc that has been evolving. Russia and China have had long-standing relationships. Don't forget that they are both products of the communist socialist system. They've always had a relationship. And so it is not now that both countries are just beginning to establish a link. If by virtue of Russia's predicament, the economic war against it, it can find some support and some succor in China, it will seek it. Of course, don't forget that China is almost becoming the second most powerful country to the United States. It has an economy that's about 17 trillion. The GDP, $17 trillion. Americans have 21. Russia, that is being pummeled by the West, has only 1.5 trillion. So Russia is, in terms of competition to the United States, economically is nowhere. It is China that can provide the kind of support that Russia will need to survive. And Russia has keyed into that without necessarily dragging China into the war. Countries support each other during situations. They support, they oppose. The United States is busy building alliances against Russia. Russia also has been building alliances to be able to survive the onslaught of the West.
Indeed. And NATO ministers met today, as well as some presidents. The Polish president was at the meeting earlier, as well as U.S. President Joe Biden. And then the EU is preparing a 10th round of package of sanctions against Russia. I mean, it almost seems like at this point, they're running out of ideas, to bring Russia to its knees regarding this war. I don't know if you could even suggest, perhaps at this time, or even help us think through whether there are other strategies that they could apply in this war. Because in the end, everybody wants it to end, wants the war to end, but they also don't want Ukraine to suffer so much.
Well, I'm not sure that everybody wants it to end. If they want it to end, they know what to do. What they're trying to do is to get, as in all wars, is to get your opponent to be weak enough to be available for negotiation. And what they are thinking they can do is to get Russia to have lost so much economically and militarily that it will be willing to negotiate. But Russia itself is in a situation where it wants to get Ukraine to a situation where it will no longer find war as a viable option. The spring of offensive is supposed to have two major objectives: the total control of the Donbas region in the east and the control of the south coast, including Odessa. So if Russia can achieve that, perhaps even go further and take over Kiev and effect a change of government, then you can negotiate the future of Ukraine. The Western powers are trying to prevent that by giving new weapons, new tanks, military tanks, Bradley fighting weapons, Leopard, all kinds of tanks, and still bolstering Ukraine. But Ukraine is suffering horrendous destruction and losses of human beings. The Russians are suffering, but not to the same extent. And so somebody has to step in and try to bring this madness to a close, because the longer it goes on, the more the danger that it will escalate to a global conflict. What we have now is a situation in which the West is providing so much to Ukraine to be able to stand up to Russia. Russia is not going to back down. And from all the analysis that I've listened to and read, Ukraine is not likely to prevail over Russia. And so where do we find ourselves? What if the offensive, the spring offensive, is so effective as for Russia to overrun Kiev? What will the West do? Are they going to back off from the fight? Are they going to provide more weapons and get to a situation where we'll be talking about nuclear war? We have seen the Russians withdrawing from START. That's an indication that all gloves are off. They are not going to be restrained in our response. If you go further to bolster Ukraine to be able to defeat us, to attempt to defeat us, we will use all that we have. So we have gotten to a situation where I don't know who's going to do it. It doesn't look like it's going to do the US. The Western countries, the European countries are suffering from this war. The Russians are not suffering as much as the Europeans. They are the ones suffering energy prices, they're the ones suffering from high prices, they're the ones shortages, and so on. In spite of the fact that they thought that they were the ones going to bring the Russians down. So everybody is suffering. Of course, we are suffering as a result. We're buying bread now at 1,000 naira per loaf. That is the aftershock, what we might call aftershock of the Ukrainian war. Because Ukraine is a major producer of wheat. So the United States, from the way I see it, may have to change course. The whole idea of wanting to bring Russia down is meaningless, because Russia is a capitalist in its country. There's no socialism, there's no ideological difference between the Soviet Union and Russia and the United States of America. So what is all this power conflict about? The great conflict the United States should be planning to face is China. China is the one that, by the end of this decade, will take over from the United States as the largest economy in the world and one of the most powerful. So we need to end the Ukraine war before the Ukraine war ends the war. Because this is how people mobilized in the First World War. Before you knew it, everybody was mobilizing and we went into war. The dangers now are greater because with nuclear weapons, we cannot afford to fight a war. No war is viable anymore. A global war is not viable because it will destroy us all. So we should be looking at how to find a solution. And unfortunately, I don't know, the United Nations is not playing any creative role to bring this to this madness. We should bring it to an end.
Is that your concern, a nuclear war up on the horizon, with Russia scrapping the final phase, the fourth stage of the New START treaty with the United States?
Yes. No, I don't think so. War, nuclear war is not something to be taken lightly. But of course, part of the psychological warfare, that's part of war. That you continue to let your enemy know that Russia is not Afghanistan. Russia is not Iraq. Russia is a giant nuclear power. In fact, it's reported to have more nuclear warheads than the United States of America. So some of these things are subtle ways of saying, look, we are not dealing with Banana Republic. We are not dealing with all these people that you jump in Iraq and so on. So we have nuclear weapons. We are not even, and we're going to stop talking to you about controlling it. So you know where we are going. If you do not stop, that's one step. We stop this talk about controlling it. We can do other things. We can use limited nuclear war in the battlefield, tactical nuclear weapons, and so on. The world is talking about nuclear war more than before, nuclear weapons, more than we ever did in the last 20 years or 30 years. We've almost forgotten about nuclear weapons. But now, the Ukrainian war and the support of the West is pushing Russia to a position of desperation. They have lost so many of their soldiers. Somebody was quoting the figure of 100,000 only at a program I watched only yesterday. So no country is going to continue to take that, particularly if you have the alternative power to end it all. But it is for, Russia is not fighting for self-destruction. So again, we must assume that there's rationality in the governance of Russia, so that it will not just opt for nuclear weapons, knowing the consequences of fighting a nuclear war. So we are hoping that sooner or later, either the Russians will overpower the Ukrainians and bring the war to an end, or somebody will step in and stop it.
That's our prayer as well. It's almost 1 year since the war started. Professor Femi Otubanjo, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.